Have you ever wondered how differently your life might have unfolded if you'd made a single different choice? If you'd said yes instead of no to something that seemed so simple, so insignificant in the moment? It's just an everyday request. Come walk with me. 4 words spoken on an autumn evening that I declined without a second thought. But since that day, those words have become the beginning of a conversation I replay endlessly in my mind, wondering what might have been said if I had chosen differently. My name is Sarah. I'm 45, and this begins on an ordinary Thursday in October, the kind where the leaves have turned golden and red, where the air holds the perfect crispness between summer's heat and winter's chill, the kind of evening made for walking, for conversations that meander like the paths through the park, the kind of moment you'd never imagine would become the dividing line of your life. Dad had come to visit for the weekend, driving up from his small coastal town to the city where I'd built my life. These visits had become our routine since Mom had passed 3 years ago. Every couple of months, he'd stay in my guest room, we'd eat at his favorite restaurants, visit a museum or catch a show, and he'd drive home on Sunday. This visit felt like all the others. We'd fallen into our comfortable patterns. He'd make coffee in the morning while I answered emails. I'd work during the day while he explored the neighborhood or read in the park nearby. Then we'd reconvene for dinner and quiet evenings. That Thursday, we'd just finished dinner at my apartment. I was clearing the dishes, mentally cataloging the work I still needed to finish before bed, a presentation to review, emails to answer, notes to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. Dad was standing by the window, looking out at the park across the street, its paths lit by the soft glow of lampposts. "It's a beautiful evening," he said, turning to me. "How about a walk? Just around the park once?" I glanced at the clock. 8:15 p.m. I'd hoped to get at least an hour of work done before bed, and I was already feeling the weight of the day's meetings and tomorrow's deadlines. "I'm pretty tired, Dad," I replied, loading the dishwasher, "and I still have some work to finish up. How about tomorrow evening instead? We could walk before dinner." He nodded, a small smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course. Don't worry about it. Tomorrow works too." "You should still go," I encouraged, wiping down the counter. "No need to stay in on my account. The paths are well lit and there are always people around until at least 10. "Maybe I will," he said, though he made no move toward the door. Instead, he returned to the armchair by the bookshelf, picking up the novel he'd been reading all week. I retreated to my home office, guilt nibbling at the edges of my consciousness. It was just a walk, 20 minutes, maybe 30. I could have spared that time, but there would be other walks, other evenings, tomorrow, or the next day. The weekend stretched before us, full of possibilities. I worked for about an hour, then heard Dad moving around in the kitchen, the sound of the kettle, the clink of a spoon against a mug, his nighttime tea routine. When I emerged from my office around 10, he was sitting at the kitchen table, mug in hand, looking thoughtful. "Finished for the night?" he asked, glancing up at me. "Not really, but I'll do the rest in the morning," I said, filling a glass with water. "How's your book?" "Good. Getting to the interesting part now." He took a sip of his tea, then added, "I did take that walk. You were right. Plenty of people out enjoying the evening. The maples are at their peak color right now. I'm glad you went," I said, feeling another twinge of regret that I hadn't joined him. "We'll go together tomorrow." He nodded, then seemed to hesitate, as if deciding whether to say something more. Finally, he spoke. "Sarah, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." Something in his tone made me pay closer attention. "What is it, Dad?" He traced the rim of his mug with his finger, eyes focused on the tea inside. "Nothing urgent? And you're tired. Let's save it for our walk tomorrow, all right?" I should have insisted. Should have sat down across from him and said, "Tell me now." Should have recognized that my father, who rarely prefaced conversations, was trying to tell me something important. Instead, I accepted the postponement as readily as I'd suggested it. "Sure, Dad. Tomorrow." He smiled and stood, rinsing his mug in the sink. "I think I'll turn in. Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Dad. Sleep well." He hesitated in the doorway, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I love you, Sarah. You know that, right?" The question caught me off guard. Of course I knew. He'd never been stingy with those words, even when I was a sullen teenager or an overly busy adult. "I know, Dad. I love you too." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and disappeared down the hallway to the guest room. I stayed up another hour, finishing just one more email, reviewing just one more slide, pushing away the nagging feeling that I should have joined him on that walk, that I should have asked what he wanted to talk about. Tomorrow, I assured myself. We'll have plenty of time tomorrow. But tomorrow arrived with a horrifying finality I never could have imagined. I woke to sunshine streaming through my blinds and the unusual quiet of my apartment. Dad was typically an early riser, the smell of coffee already filling the kitchen by the time I emerged from my room. But that morning, no sounds of movement, no coffee aroma, no NPR playing softly from the kitchen radio. I knocked gently on the guest room door around 8, thinking perhaps he was sleeping in. When there was no answer, I pushed the door open carefully. He looked peaceful, as if still asleep, but the stillness was absolute, definitive. The book he'd been reading lay open on the bedside table, his reading glasses folded neatly on top. What followed exists in my memory as fragments. The 911 call, the arrival of strangers in uniform, the clinical confirmation of what I already knew, the terrible phone calls to my brother across the country, to Dad's sister, to his friends back home. He went peacefully, they told me, as if that could possibly matter now. In his sleep, he wouldn't have suffered, but all I could think about was the walk not taken, the conversation postponed, the words left unspoken between us. There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. What had he wanted to tell me? What words had he carried with him, hoping to share during a quiet walk around the park? What knowledge or memory or wisdom or confession had he taken with him, unexpressed? In the days that followed, as we made arrangements and received mourners and sorted through his belongings, I kept returning to that moment. The invitation I declined. The conversation we never had. The final words I'd hear him speak. I love you, Sarah. You know that, right? At least I'd answered that. At least he'd gone knowing I loved him too. But what else had remained unsaid? What had he wanted to share during that evening walk? A week after, my brother Jason and I drove to Dad's house to begin the overwhelming task of sorting through his life. The small coastal cottage was exactly as he'd left it, before driving up to visit me. Mail neatly stacked on the entry table, plants freshly watered, refrigerator cleaned out of anything that might spoil. He was always so organized, Jason said, running his hand along the bookshelf filled with perfectly alphabetized volumes. Makes this easier, I guess. But as we worked through Dad's belongings, a different picture began to emerge. In his desk, we found a folder labeled Medical, containing reports and test results from appointments I hadn't known about. Terms like advanced and treatment options and prognosis jumped out from the pages. Did you know about this? Jason asked, face pale as he scanned the documents. I shook my head, a cold realization settling in my stomach. He never said anything. According to these dates, he's known for at least 2 months, Jason said, shuffling through the papers. Why wouldn't he tell us? The answer came in the form of a letter, sealed in an envelope with my name written on it, tucked inside his bedside table drawer. With trembling hands, I opened it. My dearest Sarah, it began in his familiar handwriting. If you're reading this, it means our walk will have to wait for another time, in another place. I'm sorry for the abruptness of my departure. The doctors gave me a timeline, but we never know the exact hour, do we? I've been trying to find the right moment to tell you and Jason about my condition, but the timing never seemed right. Either you were busy with work, or we were having such a nice time together that I couldn't bear to darken the day with bad news, so I kept postponing it, telling myself there would be a better moment. That evening, I suggested a walk around the park. I had finally worked up the courage. I thought the movement might make the conversation easier somehow, walking forward while talking about an ending. Isn't that just like me, to think so metaphorically? Don't blame yourself for not joining me. That's not why I'm writing this. You're busy building your life, and I've always been so proud of your dedication and success. One missed walk doesn't erase a lifetime of walks taken together. What I wanted to tell you was this. I've made arrangements for everything. The house, the finances, all the practical matters are taken care of. The details are with my lawyer, Louise Harmon. Her card is in my desk drawer. But more importantly, I wanted to tell you how much joy you and your brother have brought to my life. How watching you grow into the people you've become has been my greatest privilege. How even after your mother's passing, I never felt alone because I had you both in my life. I know you tend to work too hard, to put off living until some future date when all the tasks are done and all the emails are answered. If I could give you one final piece of fatherly advice, it would be this. Don't postpone joy. Don't save living for tomorrow. The sunset happening right now is the only one exactly like it you'll ever see. Take the walk, Sarah. Whatever form it takes in your life, the conversation you've been putting off, the trip you keep postponing, the passion you've set aside for more practical pursuits. Take the walk while you can, with those you love beside you. I've had a wonderful life, with far more blessings than sorrows. Please don't mourn me too deeply or too long. Remember me when you see a particularly vibrant sunset, or when you hear a terrible pun that makes you groan, or when you take that walk in the park as the leaves are changing. All my love, always, Dad. I sat on his bed, letter clutched in my hands, tears streaming down my face. Jason read it over my shoulder, his own grief evident in his shaky breathing. He knew, I whispered. He was trying to tell me that night. He was trying to protect us, Jason replied, sitting beside me, right until the end. We spent the rest of that day in silence, moving through Dad's house, discovering small preparations he'd made for his departure, labels on certain items indicating who should receive them, notes tucked into books he thought we might enjoy, a photo album he'd recently compiled, documenting our family's history with careful captions in his neat handwriting. That evening, Jason went to pick up dinner, and I found myself standing at the back door of Dad's cottage, looking out at the path that led down to the beach, the same path we'd walked hundreds of times over the years, as children holding his hands, as teenagers stomping ahead impatiently, as adults walking shoulder to shoulder. Without conscious decision, I stepped outside and began walking. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The same sunset Dad would have seen countless times from this very path. What else were you going to tell me? I asked aloud, as if he might somehow answer. What other wisdom were you saving for our walk? Only the sound of waves answered, constant and eternal. But as I continued down the path, memory after memory surfaced. Dad teaching me to skip stones on calm mornings, Dad explaining the constellations on clear nights, Dad listening patiently as I worked through life decisions large and small. I realized then that I did know what he might have said on our walk, because he'd been telling me all my life, in 1,000 different ways, to slow down, to notice beauty, to prioritize love over achievement, to be present for the moments that matter. I just hadn't been listening closely enough. When I reached the shore, I stood at the water's edge as darkness settled around me. I'm sorry I didn't take that walk with you, Dad, I said to the horizon, but I'm listening now. And in the sound of waves against sand, in the first stars appearing above, I felt something like forgiveness washing over me, not absolving me of regret. That would remain, a companion on future walks, but offering perspective. One missed walk didn't erase a lifetime of connection. One postponed conversation didn't negate all that had been said before. But oh, how I wished I could hear those final words he'd planned to share. How I longed for just one more sunset walk beside him. It's been 10 months since that October evening. 10 months of carrying those unspoken words with me, of wondering what wisdom or memory or confession Dad had been saving for our walk together. 10 months of learning to live with the particular ache of almost. We almost had that conversation. I almost heard his final thoughts. We almost had a proper goodbye. Summer has returned, bringing warmth to the coastal town where I now spend more time. After sorting through Dad's affairs, I couldn't bear to sell his cottage. Instead, I've kept it as a weekend retreat, a place to escape the city's constant demands. Jason brings his family once a month, and slowly we're creating new memories here while honoring the old ones. I've changed in ways both subtle and profound. Colleagues note my new boundaries around work hours, my reluctance to postpone personal commitments for professional ones, my habit of actually taking vacation days rather than letting them accumulate unused. Friends comment on my increased presence, the way I listen more intently, the walks I now suggest rather than decline. You seem different, my closest friend remarked recently as we strolled through the park near my apartment, the very park Dad had invited me to walk through that night. More here, somehow. I'm trying, I replied simply. I'm learning to take the walk. She didn't fully understand my meaning, but nodded anyway. It suits you. My therapist. Yes, I started seeing one. Calls it complicated grief, intensified by the sense of missed opportunity, the conversation that almost happened, the final message I almost received. The human mind abhors an unfinished story, she explained during one session. We create endings to give ourselves closure, but sometimes we need to accept that some stories remain unfinished. So I'm trying. Some days are harder than others. Some mornings I wake convinced that if I'd just taken that walk with Dad, everything would be different. He might have shared his diagnosis. We might have sought more treatment options. He might still be here. Other days, I accept the doctor's assertion that his condition was beyond intervention by the time he learned of it, that our walk would have been a goodbye rather than a turning point. The letter he left has become both comfort and catalyst. I keep it in my bedside table, reading it often, finding new meaning in his words as my grief evolves. The phrase that resonates most deeply, "Don't postpone joy," has become something of a personal mantra, a filter through which I evaluate choices large and small. 3 months ago, I made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable before. I requested a sabbatical from my position at the consulting firm where I'd worked for over a decade, climbing the ladder through relentless dedication and countless sacrificed evenings and weekends. 6 months, I explained to my bewildered supervisor, to work on a personal project and reassess my long-term goals. The personal project isn't something I've shared widely yet. A book combining Dad's photography, another passion I'd never fully appreciated until sorting through thousands of stunning images on his computer, with his writings about coastal conservation. He'd been quietly documenting changes to his beloved shoreline for years, combining scientific observation with poetic reflection. The work deserves to be seen, to become part of his legacy. The sabbatical began last month. I've spent most of it at the cottage, organizing his photographs, transcribing his notes, walking the same paths he walked, seeing the world through his attentive eyes. It's a different kind of closeness than I expected to have with him at this point in my life. A conversation continued through his art and words. During these walks, I often talk to him aloud, especially when I'm alone on the beach early in the morning or late in the evening. I tell him about my day, about new discoveries in his archives, about how Jason's kids are growing too fast, about my slowly changing relationship with time and achievement and purpose. And sometimes, I ask him the question that still haunts me. What were you going to tell me that night? What words did I miss by not taking that walk with you? Last week, while organizing a drawer in his desk, I found a small notebook I hadn't noticed before. Its pages were filled with drafts of letters to me and Jason, attempts to find the right words to explain his diagnosis, to share his final thoughts, to say goodbye. Some were formally structured, almost clinical in their practicality. Others were poetic and philosophical. Many were crossed out, rewritten, revised, evidence of how carefully he'd considered this final conversation, how much thought he'd put into the walk I'd declined. The most recent entry, dated the day before that evening, read simply, "Maybe words are inadequate. Maybe what matters isn't what I say, but that we're together saying it. The walk itself is the point, moving forward side by side, present to each other and to the beauty around us. If I can give my children one final gift, let it be the understanding that being present is the greatest form of love." I sat at his desk, notebook in hand, tears blurring my vision, because in those words, I found both answer and absolution. The walk itself was the message. The shared presence was the point. The specific words mattered less than the togetherness they would have been wrapped in. I had missed the walk, yes. Had missed the opportunity for that particular togetherness. But the message itself had reached me anyway, through his letter, through his photographs, through this final notebook entry. Dad was still teaching me, still guiding me, even in his absence. Yesterday evening, I invited my neighbor from 2 cottages down to walk on the beach at sunset. Ellen is in her 70s, a retired marine biologist who knew Dad from local conservation efforts. We've developed a friendly relationship over these months as I've spent more time here, occasionally sharing coffee on her deck or wine on mine. As we walked along the shore, waves gentle against the sand, sky ablaze with color, she shared stories about Dad I'd never heard before. How he'd organized a community cleanup after a particularly damaging storm. How he'd photographed the same tide pool every day for a year, documenting its microscopic changes. How he'd fought against a development that would have destroyed a critical nesting habitat. "He was so proud of you and your brother," she said, as we turned back toward our cottages. "Always talking about your accomplishments, showing photos from your visits. I wish I'd visited more," I admitted, the familiar regret rising. "Made more time." Ellen was quiet for a moment, considering. "You know," she said finally, "your father once told me something I've never forgotten. We were walking this very beach, lamenting how quickly life passes, and he said, "The point isn't to have more time. The point is to be more awake during the time we have." The words struck me with their simple wisdom, so characteristic of Dad. "That sounds like him," I said, smiling through tears. "He lived that way," Ellen continued, "especially after your mother passed. He noticed everything, the way light changes through seasons, the patterns waves make on sand, the specific songs of different birds. He was the most present person I've ever known." We walked in companionable silence for a while, the sky deepening from orange to purple to indigo, stars beginning to appear above the darkening ocean. "I missed a walk with him," I said suddenly, the confession rising unbidden. "The night before he passed, he asked me to walk with him, and I said I was too tired, too busy. He had something important to tell me, and now I'll never know what it was." Ellen's hand touched my arm gently. "Perhaps he told you anyway, in his own way. Perhaps he's telling you still." Her words echoed my own recent realization, offering confirmation from someone who had known a side of Dad I was only now discovering. That night, I sat on the cottage deck late into the evening, wrapped in one of Dad's old sweaters against the coastal chill. The moon cast a silver path across the water, an invitation to journey, to follow, to connect. "I'm taking the walks now, Dad," I said aloud to the night sky. "All the different kinds. I'm trying to be more awake during the time I have." The breeze lifted slightly, rustling through beach grass, carrying the eternal rhythm of waves against shore. Not a response exactly, but a reminder of continuity, of natural cycles that transcend individual endings and beginnings. This morning, I woke before dawn and walked down to the beach while the world was still dark. Sat on the same driftwood log where Dad and I had sat countless times over the years, watched as the horizon slowly brightened, as colors seeped back into the world, as another day unveiled itself moment by moment. And I realized something important. While I'll never stop wondering about the specific words Dad might have shared on our missed walk, I do know the essence of what he would have said, because he'd been saying it all my life, in how he lived, in what he valued, in the way he showed his love. Be present, notice beauty, don't postpone joy. Recognize that walks, literal and metaphorical, are how we move through life together, how we share our stories, how we create meaning from our finite time. I'll always carry the regret of that declined invitation. Will always wish I'd said yes instead of no. Will always wonder about the exact words I missed. That particular conversation remains unfinished, a book closed before the final chapter could be read. But the larger conversation continues. In the photographs I'm curating, in the writings I'm preserving, in the paths I walk now with more attentive presence, in the boundaries I've established to prioritize connection over accomplishment, in the ways I'm learning to be more like him, more awake to beauty, more appreciative of ordinary moments, more willing to pause for what matters. I walk alone now, yes, but I carry his voice with me, his wisdom, his gentle insistence on what truly matters. His final words, "I love you, Sarah. You know that, right?" replay in my memory alongside a lifetime of other words, other lessons, other love freely given. And in that continuity, I find both grief and grace, the pain of a particular walk not taken, the comfort of all the walks that came before, the commitment to all the walks yet to come, now taken with the awareness he tried to cultivate in me all along. So if someone asks you to walk with them, consider saying yes. The dishes can wait. The emails can wait. The work will still be there tomorrow. But that specific sunset, that particular conversation, that unique opportunity for connection, these things are unrepeatable. These moments, once declined, cannot be reclaimed. I learned this truth the hardest way possible, through a simple invitation refused, through 4 final words replayed endlessly in memory. How about a walk? Words I would give anything to answer differently now. But since I cannot go back, I move forward instead, walking the paths he walked, noticing what he would have noticed, living with the presence he tried to teach me, carrying his final message not just in memory, but in how I choose to live each day. And sometimes, in the quietest moments of these solitary walks, I feel him beside me still, not physically, but in the values he instilled, the beauty he revered, the attention he cultivated. In those moments, the walk continues, the conversation extends, and the love remains, uninterrupted by distance, undiminished by time, unchanged by the final farewell we never got to say.